are live.
Hello.
Hello, and welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour.
I'm Olivia Candosia.
And I am Brandon Tessers. And I am a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy. And Olivia is an intern therapist on her way to being licensed, which will be nice because then we can really tighten up the tagline.
For sure. The exam is passed, so we're like one step closer.
Just some months left. This is not therapy. It is just an open conversation. Olivia and I are here talking with one another about whatever it is that we talk about. We are also talking with you all, and we're doing our best always to make our guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and what you're hearing from us. For those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat, we appreciate that because it gives us information that helps inform our guesses about who you are and what you're interested in and what you're hearing. So this, like any other conversation, is just people communicating and impacting one another. It can be questions and answers. That's the format of this, often lends itself to that, but it doesn't need to be. It can be just like any conversation. Please don't worry about interrupting or staying on topic or anything. We don't do that anyway. And even if we did, I would still rather that if you're thinking about something that we know and we can go in that direction.
Even if it's vampires.
Even if it's vampire, no matter what it is. We literally were talking before this. We'll talk later. We have plenty of opportunities to talk about whatever things we want to talk about. The purpose of this stream is for us to be able to talk about whatever things you all want to talk about. So we just, in the absence of any guidance on that, we start with wherever we start, but we'd rather go where you want to go. We work with a private therapy practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is located in Northbrook, Illinois. We do couples, individual, family, and group therapy with people in the state of Illinois, and now with people in the state of Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. We also work with a couple of executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. We do try to read out comments as they come in because we're streaming on multiple different platforms, and each of you will only see the chat comments from the platform you're on. So we'll read out and repeat what we're responding to so that everyone's on the same page. I think that's it.
Yeah. I was waiting. I'm like, check. You got the points. You got
it.
All right. Yeah.
You'd think at some point it would be more automatic, but no. I've been doing this for close to 5 years now. I don't know. I don't remember when I first started doing the stream, but I think it was like spring or summer of 2020, I believe. I should go back and look. Anyway.
I am thinking about emotional regulation and what that means.
Meaning like you're
I have been a preschool teacher. I have taught people about like ways to regulate their emotions, but I don't know if I really have a grasp on like what that actually means.
Yeah, generally I think so. This is one of those ones that we'll talk about of like, what do people mean when they say it versus like, what is the technical definition? Sure. And there are meaningful distinctions and they're both valuable and whatever. Generally what people mean though, when they're talking about emotional regulation, generally what they mean, if you ask them what they mean about like experiencing unpleasant emotions, like anger and fear and sadness and whatever, and then being able to stop like diminish the extent, the intensity of that experience, and or eliminate on the way to eliminating that experience is generally what people mean. Mm-hmm. Generally what people are talking about without really putting it together is the expression of those unpleasant emotions. So if someone is fuming, angry, but like speaking in a very calm manner, then we generally wouldn't say like they're dysregulated or whatever.
Right.
So it's when somebody starts like yelling and kicking, or when someone starts like weeping, or these communications, that these behaviors and communications that we think of as like not what is socially called for, or not appropriate, or not calm, or whatever. And when we see those, then we'll talk about emotional regulation.
Mm-hmm. I guess like I've been thinking about how I cry often And sometimes I will try and stop myself from crying, but you've invited me to not do that and just allow myself to cry. And I'm wondering, like, does that mean I'm bad at regulating my emotions, or like, I don't.
Well, so regulate, the word, like, same as regular,
Uh-huh.
which, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong about this, but I believe that this all has to do with like the idea of rules or expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But in our modern context, regular just means like the same, as what is typically expected.
Mm-hmm.
So like, if you go to bed at the same time every day, you have a regular bedtime. And if one day you go to bed significantly later than that, you would say, I didn't go to bed at my regular bedtime.
Mm-hmm.
So regulating emotions, what we're really talking about is like having having a parameters within which, like, these are where I am emotionally normally most of the time. And when I get outside of that, how quickly do I get myself back within that window?
Mm-hmm.
Again, though, we don't generally talk about it when it's like, oh, I'm feeling much more happy than I usually do. We don't generally talk about like, well, you need to regulate your emotions.
Yeah.
So for the most part, when people are talking about this or thinking about this, we're just saying like, you're experiencing some unpleasant emotions
Mm-hmm.
and are behaving in some way, communicating in some way that expresses that to other people that other people don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So if I see you doing something that I don't like you doing,
Mm-hmm.
and I think, you're only doing that because you're angry, then I might think you need to regulate your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're looking at the, like, research literature and stuff, then we're talking about what you're feeling, not what you're expressing. Because then we're talking about like, what do people do in order to regulate their emotions? So like self-soothing and things like that, grounding and mindfulness, whatever people do that helps them like go from being really stressed, really angry, really scared, down to like a more manageable level of that or a more tolerable level of that.
Mm-hmm.
So we're often not talking about like, is this making sense?
It is.
Colloquially, we're mostly talking about it when we see somebody doing something that we see as the absence of emotional regulation.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about it in like the literature and stuff, we're generally literally talking about the process of getting one's emotions into a tolerable state.
Mm-hmm. Tolerable for them.
Right. I mean, tolerable is, yes, theoretically tolerable for them, but meaning like, depending on what context we're talking about, as said by their self-report or as said by like observing what they're experiencing. But we can also say for each of us individually, like if I'm really angry and then I do something with the intent of like, I don't want to be this angry, so I'm going to do X, and I do it, and now I'm not angry, then I just regulated my emotions.
Mm-hmm. I like to think that sometimes crying is me regulating my emotions. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah. I mean, not necessarily always, but often, and most of the time even when it's not the purpose, like the primary purpose, it's typically an incidental effect. So a lot of this has to do with cybernetics.
What's cybernetics?
Cybernetics, so I'm going to say this because this is my understanding, but I could be wrong. The people I learned this from could have been wrong when they taught me. But the term, although we mostly think of it in terms of like sci-fi and stuff now, actually originated with family systems theory. So when people were exploring like therapeutic systems theory stuff, what I mean by that is when people were exploring systems theory in the therapeutic context. A cybernetic system is a system which monitors itself and makes adjustments in response to changing environmental contexts in order to maintain equilibrium. Mm-hmm. So the simplest and like most classic example of a cybernetic system is a thermostat, an HVAC system, including the thermostat in a person's house, where you have the thermostat, which has a place for you to enter what temperature you would like it to be. It has a thermometer in it to be able to determine what is the temperature actually. and then it has the ability to control the other elements of the system, so it can turn on the heat and turn it up, or turn on the air conditioning and turn it up, turn it down, so on. So how that works then is we say 70 degrees is what we want it to be. So 70 has now become equilibrium. Equilibrium means like the point at which, or the state in which things could continue indefinitely without an issue. Like this is the balanced, persistent state.
Mhm.
So we set 70 as the equilibrium state. Well, the thermometer is reading, it's actually 76 degrees. So then it sends signals to turn on the air conditioning and cool the air. And as that happens, the reading on the thermometer comes down. Now it's 75, now it's 74, 73, 72. And when it gets within a certain window, but let's just say 70, okay, it's the temperature we want it to be. And now we turn off the air conditioning. But the thermostat or the thermometer is still watching the temperature. When it gets up to 71 or 72, it's like, hey, turn the AC back on to bring it back down. So
It's gonna be exhausting.
Well, certainly it utilizes energy. Yeah. I mean, HVAC systems are literally probably some of the most energy intensive is what I was going to say, but that's not the right word. Consume more energy than like most other things in a person's house.
Mm-hmm.
A person's home, I should say, apartments, condos, whatever. So we do that. Like one kind of way of talking about what a system is almost defining it by like the idea that there is some equilibrium that the system is attempting to maintain. And this process is called homeostasis. People learn that word a lot in like middle school or high school science, and it's one of those ones that tends to stick in people's mind even if they don't remember what it is. Just as a fun fact, and I'm only sharing this because these fun fact things are things that I think are likely to help a person remember some connection that I'm making. The state, the desired state, remember that's called equilibrium. The process of a system monitoring things and responding to changes in order to maintain or get back to equilibrium, that process is homeostasis. Because people will often think homeostasis is like the state, the balanced state. Isn't energy intensive the right word? That's what I would say. Yeah, probably, but I was trying to communicate, or I mean, it certainly would have been a fine term for it. I was trying to communicate how much energy it consumes, and so I wanted to say something about, consuming or using. But yeah, energy intensive would certainly work there. Anyway. That's where I got stuck, is like, I don't want to just say it's something that a lot of energy is theoretically utilized when it needs to be used. So I was trying to talk about, like, I wanted to convey that it is constantly turning off.
I feel like an HVAC machine.
Yeah, you are.
Oh my God.
So changes in the context that take the system away from equilibrium, we can call that perturbation, things that perturb the equilibrium, right? So like when the ambient temperature is 70 degrees, everything's chill. But then the sun comes up and the temperature like the heat rises. So that's perturbing the system. And that's when the system then has to respond and do something in order to maintain in that space.
Oh, energy demanding?
Energy demanding, that's good too. I think I was just trying to communicate two different things, that there's not a phrase that really encapsulates both those things. And one is what you're talking about, like how much energy it utilizes when it is used, like in order to do what it's doing. And another is like how, like in a practical sense, how frequently, like how much is that system being utilized in most people's homes.
And what did you say?
I don't think I ended up coming up with like a phrase to encapsulate it, and just switched over to saying it this way. I'm always intrigued by these things because, like, to me, those seem like two, not mutually exclusive by any means, very related, but two separate things, right? Like running a marathon, for example, is a very energy intensive thing, but I don't spend any energy on that because I don't do it. Where I was trying to communicate, like, energy hungry, that's a good one. Because I do think that one generally, I don't know, but I would I would interpret it, and I would assume that people would generally interpret it as like it is the thing that is eating up energy, not just in theory would if and when it's used, but like in actuality is taking on. Anyway, um, so yes, like literally our bodies are systems that when we get too hot, we have systems that kick in, sweating and panting and whatever, in order to bring our body temperature back within limits, the tolerable limits. And then family systems theory was starting to look at like specifically the family unit as a system, as opposed to like an individual person or a larger subset of community or whatever. To me, systems theory is like far more important than I'll say like psychology in terms of therapy. Understanding how systems work and how systems impact individual components or elements of those systems is a lot more important than understanding like the way that a person's psyche impacts what they're thinking and feeling and doing. Not that that's not important, but if I had to choose one or the other. And we were bringing this up where we start. Oh, emotional regulation. So that's generally what we're talking about with emotional regulation is like the processes which maintain an emotional equilibrium that keep things within the tolerable level, and then something happens that takes you out of that, a perturbation, and then some processes kick in to bring it back within those sustainable limits. And it is true, by the way, that like pleasant emotions also get regulated. You know, like when you're so excited, that doesn't last forever. There are processes that bring that back within limits. It's just generally we are happy to wait for just whatever natural intrinsic processes that will bring that back within those limits. We're generally not in a place where we're like consciously saying, I want to get the intensity of this pleasant experience diminished. Stimming, by the way, is one of the things that it's one of those processes by which emotions are regulated, and it does kick in without a person thinking about it, which also means that it does kick in sometimes when it's a pleasant experience that is outside of tolerable limits. We'll start stimming as one of those processes to kind of bring it within tolerable limits. Pleasant and unpleasant is a very different thing from like beneficial or valuable or sustainable or, you know, like we all generally, I know that the joking response to this is going to be to say that this is wrong, but generally we all enjoy being awake more than we enjoy being asleep, because being asleep, we are not like capable of feeling enjoyment. You know, one way of talking about death is sleeping forever, right? Obviously, a lot of us, most all of us maybe are tired, and so the idea of going to sleep is very enjoyable. And I don't mean that. I just mean literally, I'd rather be thinking than not conscious. But that doesn't mean that being conscious is better than not being conscious. And being conscious isn't something you can do forever. I would much rather be happy than sad, but it doesn't mean that being happy is better in some broad way than being sad. It's just more pleasant, and it's not something that you could do forever. On my local Eagle Chick live stream, the chicks start panting when it gets warm, and then the collective heat of all the modems on every watcher's computer whirring on, they all simultaneously type out, why are they panting? Are they okay? Actually absorbs the extra heat and global equilibrium is restored. That's funny. There was and I can't claim to like understand this in depth and detail. I only have a passing knowledge of this, so I could be getting things wrong. But there was a famous thought experiment called Daisy World that showed how like evolutionary responses can happen on a global level, meaning that so if you imagine this planet that is just covered with daisies, and the daisies can be either white or they can be black, and these traits are passed on genetically, hereditary. That if the entire planet is covered with white daisies, which reflect heat, then the ambient temperature of the entire planet will start to decrease. And if it's entirely covered with black daisies, then it absorbs all the heat and the ambient temperature of the entire planet increases. And so you can, in the thought experiment, you can imagine that like as it gets colder, there's a certain temperature that the daisies need to maintain in order to survive. As it gets colder, daisies which are white and therefore reflect rather than absorb heat are going to die off first, where the daisies which are black, the petals are black, will absorb the heat and be able to survive. So as it gets colder, the white daisies start to die off and the black daisies take over, and the whole world becomes like a larger percentage of it is black daisies, which reflects more, or I'm sorry, which absorbs more of the sunlight and increases the ambient temperature. So now the temperature increases. And as the temperature increases, the black daisies, which absorb heat, are more poorly suited, and the white daisies, which reflect the sunlight, then they start to thrive because it's too hot for the black daisies. And so there's a planet-wide equilibrium where that planet-wide, the proportion of black to white daisies would have to be dispersed within like what maintains the planet-wide equilibrium. Which just showing that like evolution and system theory and adaptive responses and whatever are not just in an individual or not just in a species, but in like ecosystems, including an entire planet.
I find writing to be an almost meditation practice that brings my often racing mind back to a state of equilibrium. It's almost like journaling.
For sure. Writing, communicating are generally, not always, but generally, I'm referring to creative writing in the first comment. Yeah. Communication generally is an emotionally regulating experience. Not always done for that reason. Same with like crying, right? But even when done for other reasons, as an incidental effect, tends to be emotionally regulating. Part of that is because things like when we say our thoughts are racing, that's not an objective measurement of something, right? Like we can't actually track how many thoughts per moment am I having. So that phrase is used to label a subjective experience. I'm experiencing a thing that I am describing as my thoughts are racing. In order to experience that thing, I have to be paying attention to my own cognitive space. I have to be noticing my own thoughts. If I am not noticing my own thoughts, then I would say I'm not thinking at all. But I certainly wouldn't say, maybe I'd say like, I'm probably thinking, but I'm just not aware of it. But I would not say my thoughts are racing when I don't even notice them.
Okay, racing 90 thoughts per hour. I don't know what TPH means. Oh, thoughts per hour.
Thoughts per hour.
Right. Because this isn't, sometimes I say these things and people that are like, oh, it's just language. It's not about whether it's correct. You correct. I'm not trying to correct anything or take anything away. I'm trying to point out what that language is a reference to. My thoughts racing is a reference to my subjective experience of observing my own thoughts and having a difficult time tracking them and having a lot of different ones coming in rather than thinking like, oh, I'm getting like these are all on the same track and I feel like I'm making good progress. So writing or communicating, talking, as well as many other things are going to draw your attention outside, away from your own thoughts, and then to whatever it is that you're doing. So you won't feel that way anymore. And racing thoughts is not only a label of like an unpleasant cognitive experience, it's also a driver of that experience. If you label that as racing thoughts, nobody's ever like, my thoughts are racing and this is a very pleasant thing that I'm enjoying, right?
My thoughts just ran a 5K in 25 minutes and it was very energy intensive.
So when we think things like, oh no, my thoughts are racing, that is something that we don't like. So that tends to dysregulate us, meaning like now we were already having an experience that wasn't pleasant, or we wouldn't have labeled it in this way. Now our experience is even more unpleasant. So that now we've started the process of looping.
Yeah.
My thoughts are racing is often could often be subbed out to say I'm anxious. Not always; those two things wouldn't always swap, but generally, for the most part, when people are saying my thoughts are racing, they could also say I'm anxious. And so this is getting anxious about being anxious. So drawing your attention away doesn't mean that your thoughts slow down, because again, that's not a thing. We can't. Thoughts are not actually crossing distance or whatever, like. But your subjective experience of them is much better, much more pleasant, and that then stops it from escalating further, and then natural processes which take over to try and regulate can be more effective.
What's the thing in Harry Potter where it's the polyjuice? He's like, I've forgotten what I've forgotten.
Not it's a remembrall.
Uh-huh.
Polyjuice is the potion that lets them transform, like polymorph.
Oh, that's right.
It's a little device that turns red if you've forgotten something.
Yes.
Or at least that's what it is in the movies. I read the books 15 years ago, but my wife just read the first one to our oldest, and so we started watching the first movie. So I only know what it looks like.
Yeah.
Regulation. We are always regulating, right?
Mm-hmm.
That if there's too few of some calories or nutrients or whatever in our system, we do things to bring more in. If there's too much, we have processes that get rid of them. That, generally speaking, anything that you can think of that like more of this is always better than less, or vice versa, less of this is always better than more.
Mm-hmm.
Those are generally constructs. Those are ideas that we have like labeled some stuff. Because in reality, pretty much anything you identify, like too much is bad, too little is bad. And bad meaning here like fatal, Too hot, you die. Too cold, you die.
Mm-hmm.
Too much salt in your system, you die. Not enough salt in your system, you die, kind of thing. So all of our processes are built on top of this idea of like, as we decrease past or towards certain lower limits, we do things to get things up. And as we approach upper limits, we do things to get things down. We are constantly...
It's happening again, Brandon, where I'm like, this is stressing me out, but it's always existed.
Yeah.
But thinking about it.
Well, again, we keep talking about on the stream recently. Maybe I'm wrong. It seems to me like we've been talking about this idea that we all have that we are supposed to consciously be aware of and understand and be in control of everything that happens.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you sweat without conscious thought, which isn't to say that some of the things that we do are under conscious control and some things are not, because it's not that either. Because if you think certain things, you are more likely to sweat. To the extent that we could effectively say that like you can make yourself sweat. If you wanted to make yourself sweat, you
By
could
just
potentially identify,
By just thinking I can make myself
a
sweat.
different one. Not by thinking thoughts start sweating now.
Right.
But same with like raising your heart rate. We all know that if you're experiencing a certain emotional or psychological state, your heart rate is likely faster or slower. I mean, it's, when people have medical issues where heart rate is an issue, they're taught calming exercises to decrease their heart rate.
Another game changer episode is have I told you about this? Where they take the contestants' heartbeats per minute, the resting state. And then the whole idea is like, if you go 20 above that, then you don't get any points. But if you stay under or at that, you get points. And so the whole idea is like they're trying to get their heartbeats to go up. And so the contestants the whole time are like trying to regulate themselves so their heartbeat stays at their like.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it was really interesting.
Heart going too fast, that's bad. Heart going too slow, that's also bad. Blood pressure too high, blood pressure too low. Like there's...
Yes. I knew I had a fan.
Yeah. There's really nothing like observable, like something in the world that is concrete, where like no matter how much you have, more of it would be better. or no matter how much you have, less of it would be better.
Mhm.
So everything, I think the best way to point this out is like, imagine for most of us, I think we've had this experience of driving on like a long highway or whatever, where you're not stopping and starting and turning and whatever. You're headed more or less directly forward in a straight line for some long period of time. The way that works is not that you like identify exactly the heading and get the steering wheel to exactly the spot and then stop and it just goes. The way that works is that you are constantly making micro adjustments.
That's why I can't do cruise control. I'm like, no way. Also, I don't know how to do cruise control.
Well, it's funny because cruise control now but originally older cruise control is just speed. It didn't
That's what I think of it as.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There is now cruise control that will
adjust.
like if you're getting too close to the lane lines, it will.
Oh, that all goes into cruise control? Like that's.
I think this is now called like adaptive cruise control or something. I don't know the terms, but yes, now cars, in fact, you can even hit a button where like if you're if you're behind other cars, you can hit a button when you're like that distance
Emotional
behind cars,
regulation.
and it will just keep you it'll keep you that same distance behind them.
Fascinating.
So if they speed up, you speed up or whatever.
Wow. Even cars do it.
Yeah, I mean, really what we're talking about is automation.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's automatic, we're talking about things that happen without us having to consciously notice or decide to make them happen. They just happen. That doesn't mean they happen for no reason. It means they happen without us having to consciously make them happen.
Mm-hmm.
So like breathing happens automatically. Does that mean that you cannot consciously control your breathing? No, you can consciously control your breathing. You can make it stop or speed up or slow down or whatever. There are limits. You can only make it stop for so long with conscious intention. Heart beating, digestion, all these things.
There's a limit to how slow you can make your heart rate, right? You can't
Yeah, well, zero heart rate is death.
Yeah, you can't make it turn off.
Consciously?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Was that a question from like I'm worried, I don't want to mess around with it?
No. That was like
kill myself.
Like, surely there's a limit there, right? Like,
there is, although, and this is certainly not like an area of expertise that I've like looked into a lot, but there are reports from various sources of people being able to take it far below what we would generally think of as a sustainable limit.
That's probably what.
How reliable is that? I don't know.
It's what magicians do before they win the lottery, right? With like the lock and key.
Yeah, or just anyone who's like trying to hold their breath for a long
Those
time.
scare me so bad
I hate it.
When they're on stage and they go.
I think that's part of why it's such a popular. Well, I don't know how popular the trick is in terms of like common.
Yeah.
Like how commonly it's done, but the fact that we all think about it and know about it so much.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the reason that it's so widespread there is because it's. For me, I have no ability to see somebody underwater and not like try to hold my own breath to some extent or like worry about how long they've been underwater.
Ascetics have shown us that they can mimic death with a controlled heart rate. That's part of what I was referring to, that there are various reports of people who have learned how to like slow their heart rate or lower their body temperature or raise it or,
Cars do it, HVACs do it, let's do regulate.
I can slow my heart rate and lower blood pressure with my mind.
Yeah, I mean, everybody can. The reliability with which everybody can do that, meaning there are things that happen in a person's mind, because when we say mind, we mean like conscious thought. There are things that happen in a person's mind that will raise your blood pressure or lower it and raise your heart rate or lower it for everybody. What you're saying there, I think, is obviously like generally that phrasing communicates the idea that I can decide to lower my blood pressure or heart rate and then do something cognitively that results in that, which that's not something that everybody can do.
I realized I'm trying to regulate myself from not laughing, which is a joyful emotion.
It's a result of a joyful emotion most of the time.
And I'm thinking about how we really need to make a Schoolhouse Rock kind of album for Effective Artistry Theories.
That'd be fun. But I can't slow my sugar consumption rate with my mind. Why is this? Actually,
don't stop laughing.
All right, that question is obviously like, it seems to me at least, obviously meant to be humorous. although with some like real stuff about like how do I change habits and control diet and whatever. But that specific example is interesting in particular because we in this culture generally have a pretty bad misunderstanding of sugar and what it does and like what are good tolerable limits for it and so on. I'll say
Your dad's making me laugh.
I wasn't joking. Well, good.
Oh, I thought you said I wasn't joking about you laughing. I understand. I was reading it wrong.
So there's a real oversimplification here, but every system requires fuel in order to be active, right? You need some kind of catalyst to activate it, but then, so if we're talking about a car or a fire is usually the easier metaphor. In order to start a fire, you need the catalyst to start it going. But for the fire to be able to go, and for as long as it's going, it needs some fuel that it is consuming, that is used up in the process of it being activated. So this is true of our body systems too, right? Like any system, when it's being utilized, there is some fuel that is being consumed in the process of that. And that fuel results in some intentional, like, doing the thing that we're trying to do. Some waste byproducts, the fuel is getting changed through a chemical process that results in some of what we're trying for. And then the leftover stuff, like eating, right? You eat stuff and some of that gets turned into stuff you're looking for and you want, and some of it's just waste byproducts and you get rid of it. So this is really oversimplified, but generally the fuel for cognition is glucose, sugar. The more that a person thinks, the more they are consuming glucose. So there are not only reasons that we culturally generally would be more like consuming more glucose than historically. There are also reasons that there are stereotypes about people who are engaged in certain professions or certain patterns of navigating life that eat a lot more carbs and sugar than generally. Sorry, there are comments that distract me, so I should just read them. Monks generally can't achieve empty body until level 18, and whose campaigns go that long these days. That's referring to monks, the Dungeons and Dragons class. They get a class ability at level 18 where they are like immune to poison and like physical status effects and illness and stuff. If tracking, then I'm saving sugar fuel for a forest fire. No, actually, the opposite. I like that. Eating cake because I think heavy. At level 10, you're immune to disease and poison, but I'm not sure we can count glucose as poison. No, we definitely can't count glucose as poison. That's part of the point I'm making. I mean, the question earlier was, I can't slow my sugar consumption rate down with my mind, right? So this is a common thing that in order to get myself to eat differently, I'm utilizing cognition to try to do that. And with sugar,
we need sugar to think.
The more you try to think, the more you're using up. So there's also, I don't know how much this is particularly relevant, but I'm just addressing concerns that people might have or questions that people might have, especially if they Google things around. There's something called the blood-brain barrier, and I don't know the technical details of it, but effectively it separates like certain blood levels in the brain from blood levels in the rest of the body. So your blood sugar is going up and down all the time throughout the day. But the blood sugar in the brain, on the other side of the blood-brain barrier, stays relatively constant. There are all kinds of mechanisms in play to make that happen. So a lot of people will push back on things that, should I just name specifics and like be more clear? Okay. There is a self-evident experience that everybody has, that everybody knows, where the longer I'm engaged in some cognitive work, the less effectively my cognitive processes work. That like, if I start doing a math worksheet, the
it's easier to do questions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 than it is to do questions 15 through 20. And those are easier than to do questions 40 through 45. The longer we go, the like more we slow down, right? Everybody knows this. So there have been various attempts to explore theories on why that happens, which I'm trying not to go too off, but whatever, which is hilarious to me because like why that needs to be theorized about where no one's like the
Spill the tea.
Boy,
The good old
I've
BBB.
heard bodies tend to hoard resources when it's under chronic stress. The good of BBBs was BBB.
A blood-brain barrier.
Oh, blood-brain barrier. Thinking the Better Business Bureau. It's like, what is that?
That.
It's hilarious to me because everybody also knows, like, if you start walking, it's easier to walk at the beginning than it is later. Like, the more you've been walking, the more difficult it becomes to continue walking. And nobody needs to be like, why might this happen? What is the reasoning behind it? Because it's obviously, like, it is a process that relies on a physical structure, and that physical structure gets damaged through use. Just regular wear and tear doesn't mean like injury necessarily, but just like using something just wears it down. And fuel levels are consumed as you continue to do it. Good old Better Business Bureau regulated my brain glucose every day.
So it's funny to me that people have all their various theories. What's even more funny, and in this case by funny I mean like hilarious in a like awful way, is the particular theories that are generally settled upon. So people have been studied, like psychologists, I forget who it was, but there was some woman who did studies, as a lot of early psychologists did, by like doing stuff herself, where she would like, I think that's why I'm thinking math worksheets, because if I remember correctly, she would literally sit down and like do a bunch of math problems and monitor her progress as time goes on, and then take a break and eat some lunch and do it again and see to like explore different things. But it was relatively recently, I want to say around the turn of the millennium, that somebody proposed, they had a specific name for the theory, and it was, I can't remember their specific name, but it was basically the idea that there is some resource that is used in thinking, and that as you continue to think and that resource is diminished, your ability to think also becomes less effective. And then that theory, what you would generally see is it was debunked.
Mm-hmm.
In large part because of the blood-brain barrier. In other words, that theory was like big because it matches everyone's observed experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then everyone's like, okay, well, if that's the case, there must be some mechanism. And what is the resource that would get consumed that would diminish? And that's why you're not thinking as well or whatever. And in looking at a bunch of different options, like pretty much it was settled on the only thing that would make sense, or at least the thing that would make the most sense, is glucose.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the blood-brain barrier, the glucose levels in the brain don't really fluctuate like that all so much.
Mm-hmm.
So then the theory then is just dismissed, which is a hilarious process to me, that like,
Which theory is dismissed?
the theory that there is a resource that diminishes as you think, and that corresponds with diminishing capacity to utilize cognition. Just the process of like, I have named a thing that we all experience, and everyone's like, yep, this explains, this matches with what we experience. So there must be a resource, and we have to be able to identify it. And we couldn't identify something except for this one thing, and that one thing doesn't make sense to us, and therefore the theory is not true, and there is no resource that's getting like diminished over time. Part of the reason for that is because our culture really both part of the reason that this theory was even proposed as though it was like some phenomenal thing instead of like obviously what we all know, and the reason it was then debunked, is because our culture really relies on the idea that cognition is free. It's very important to how so much of our culture operates, that we do not treat thinking or consciousness at all as like a resource consumptive process. Because we need to be able to say things like, if you want it badly enough, you'll do it. like grit, motivation, desire. Like these are the things that if you think about things in a certain way, you can make anything happen, which is obviously untrue. Literally every single person experiences things all the time where they're trying to like think their way into making something happen and it doesn't happen. But our culture offers explanations for that of like, well, you're just doing it wrong. Other people do it fine. Or sure, you wanted it, but you didn't want it enough, which is absurd because if the proof that you didn't want it enough is that you didn't do it or that it didn't happen, then yes, it's very easy to be like, well, anything that didn't happen, you didn't want enough. But that relies, or at least it reinforces the premise that it was theoretically possible to have wanted it enough. What if a person wants it the maximum extent and that's still not enough? Anyway. Oh, never mind. That was a spam one. Offering to buy stream viewers. As though this content is not just so popular and accessible, really common denominator.
Invigorating. Next week we have like millions.
So the general theory to then explain after this other thing has been debunked, that it's not a resource, it's depleting. It does that the phenomenon still exists. We all know this, that like the longer you're thinking about something, the harder it becomes to continue thinking about that thing. So the general theory instead then is, yes, because we're incentivized to shift tactics, right? That if thinking about a problem has not resolved that problem for you, as time passes, the more likely it is to be true that shifting off of trying to think your way through that problem would be better for you. Shift to a different thing, shift to a different way of attacking that problem, whatever. Which that's definitely true, right? Oh, how tempting. What a good
Advertisement.
Oh, advertisement. Again, though, that's hilarious to me because that does not eliminate that there would still theoretically be a mechanism involved in that. This is what happens when people prioritize psychology over all else. Is like there's a psychological incentive to stop thinking or switch tactics, and that's why we then psychologically make thinking less effective. Even though it's not, you could still think just as effectively, but you can't because there is a magic psychology thing making it worse. Either way, the result is still the same. It still gets worse. It's just like this idea of, but could you still, if you really wanted to, could you still think as effectively? Which is nonsense. Anyway, yes, there are actual resources that your body utilizes for everything that we experience, including cognition and emotion. Those resources are used, those systems get damaged and need to be repaired. Even though blood glucose in the brain maintains a fairly consistent level, that does not mean that we would not have processes in place the same we do with thirst and hunger and the urge to use the bathroom or whatever. That we might have processes in place that are tracking other things, like the level of glucose available in the body overall, and saying, hey, we should not do this as much anymore. We have enough right here, but like the supply chain is disrupted. We got to make this last, right? Like if we're like, oh, we still have plenty of food in the house to last through the week, just like usual, but then all of a sudden the grocery stores disappear. We wouldn't then just be like, but keep going on as normal. We'd be like, even though there's enough food to eat, we need to start rationing it because getting more is not going to be as easy. So that output, that impulse, that experience of like, I can't keep thinking about this, still could be a result of lower glucose levels. And that's still like, certainly not the only variable, or at least we couldn't say it's the only variable. I think it'd be absurd if it was the only variable, but it still makes sense that it is an important variable. Water also matters, both with thinking and with feeling. And so many things are popping in my head, and I don't know how much we're going off on. Where are you at? What are you thinking? Are you guys? What do people think about?
I'm thinking about how I need to drink water so much more than I actually do.
Need is a tricky word.
I do. It would be beneficial. How's that? If I
Better. What's your evidence?
my evidence,
What is the stuff that's happening that suggests to you that if you drank more water, things would be better?
well, it's only things people say. I guess I don't have much evidence in my own life except for like the color of urine, like
Sure. So I'm not trying to say that nobody ever would benefit from drinking more water than they currently drink. There are times where like my entire mouth is getting dehydrated and whatever. Does that mean that my body is dehydrated, that like water levels in my body, it could be other, like or just overuse or whatever. But yes, it is certainly possible that people would benefit from drinking more water in some broad way than they are. But you shouldn't just automatically determine that unless you have some evidence to suggest it, that some things are happening which you don't like, that you could reasonably say, perhaps if I had more water, those things wouldn't happen or would happen less. Or that there are some things which you would like that aren't happening that you have reason to say, like, if I were to drink more water, those things would happen more frequently.
yeah. No, I don't have those.
This is I use this example a lot in trying to make some points. Because the general thing that everybody knows is like, you should drink 8 glasses of 8 ounces of water a day, 64 ounces of water a day. But I weigh significantly more than you weigh. You and I should drink the same amount of water. Like that's the optimal, whatever's optimal for you is the same as what's optimal for me. Doesn't seem likely.
Right.
Is the optimal amount of water for me to drink in a day where I'm hiking through the desert is the same as what I would be best for me to drink on a like cold, rainy day that I'm inside all day?
They've got to
not.
have new research on this,
I'm sure that they do.
but we all still say the 8 cups.
Well, it's not only that, although yes, regardless of to whatever extent they have new research, and I'm sure that they do. Regardless of that, everybody still is thinking about the 8 cups of 8. Second, even if we all were aware of this new, more nuanced research, what is the best possible outcome of that research? Because large-scale research is still statistically evaluated.
Right.
The whole point of it is to give out averages. There literally could not be any research done that tells an individual specific person what would be the optimal level of water for them to drink at any individual specific moment. Because the number of variables that play into that are far too numerous for anyone to track on any kind of a scale. Fortunately, we all have a very complex system built into our bodies already that monitors all those variables for us. And we don't consciously track all those variables and do all the math, that's too much. But it just outputs a little like, need to drink water. Is this high or this low? This is how much you should drink or not drink.
Would love my stats.
We call that thirst. The thirstier you are, the more you would benefit from drinking some water.
What about those gums that are like thirst quenchers?
So,
what's up with that?
Hold on.
Yeah.
My dysthymia is probably caused by how little water I drink. If I drink more water, it could convey my emotions more effectively through the BBB, Border Patrol facilities.
Okay, you know what? That's funny and also kind of accurate. Again, ridiculous oversimplification. I don't understand the details and complexities enough to really say it in detail. I could say it with more detail than what I'm about to say. But the ridiculous oversimplification is that when you're feeling things, I think generally people would agree with, when you're feeling things, there are neurotransmitters that are being released in your brain to be able to like float around and go places and attach to endings on neurons and whatever. Well, the thing through which they float is water. So the more that you're feeling some stuff, right, like that you're intensely feeling things, you are literally, again, all these things, you are using resources in order to do that. That's not free. Whether the experience is pleasant or unpleasant, pleasant or painful is separate. We're talking about intensity, that there are resources involved with an intense feeling of happiness. There are resources involved with an intense feeling of fear.
Challenge accepted. I'm coming up with a new metric for justifying eating 8 snowballs daily. Are you telling me I should post it my way to the truth? Oh no, don't encourage me. A little bit. Look, the 8 snowballs thing, think of it this way. Let's do the opposite of what we were just saying. Let's say that I have drank 64 ounces of water today, and I am like parched. I'm so thirsty. But I'm like, no, I already drank how much water I should drink for the day, so I'm not going to drink anymore. Let's say this happens at noon. We're just making up a scenario, right?
Oh, okay.
At 1, like, it's going to be worse. At 2, at 3, at 4, and by the time 8 o'clock rolls around or whatever, at some point I'm going to be like, I don't care. I need to drink water. And by the point that happens, I will be so thirsty that my impulse is going to be like, I need to dump a crap ton. So I'm going to drink a gallon of water at that point, right? I'm using water because everyone always talks about needing to drink more water. But the flip side is everyone always talks about needing to eat less. If you are hungry, and again, I want to come back to your thirst quenching gum thing, because this has a lot to do with that. If you're hungry, the way that we traditionally mean hunger, then like that's a good sign that you should put food into your system. If you intellectually like, no, I don't need this much, and there are times that's true, we'll come back to that. Then if it's one of those times where nope, you're not, that hunger is not a misread, or like it's correlated to the amount of whatever in your system, then it's only going to get worse and worse and worse over time. And by the time you finally then are like, okay, I don't care that I shouldn't eat any more sugar today, I need to eat some sugar, and then you're going to eat 8 snowballs. This is why abstinence approaches generally don't work. Not just to like drugs and sex and whatever, but abstinence meaning to abstain from. If we identify this thing is a thing that I shouldn't do or should do less of, so I should stop doing it. Always, there's a reason you're doing it. Whether you think
it's so true, because I glug that water if I like have been waiting.
Yeah. Whether you think you should, whether you think it is beneficial for you to smoke that cigarette or not, it is serving some function. And so by just stopping it, there is now some function that was important that is now not being met. And because you have treated the thing as though it is only bad and doesn't serve any purpose for you, you're not trying to replace it or identify what role it was playing and get that from some other method. You're just trying not to do it at all. So that function is going unserved, unfulfilled. Also, overriding the impulse is cognitively taxing. So you're draining your resources, your cognitive resources, at a much higher rate. You're getting more emotionally dysregulated, et cetera, et cetera. So then eventually when you lose the capacity, eventually you just cannot continue to think your way into overriding the impulse. Again, try and hold your breath. No matter how hard you think about, I'm going to hold it, eventually it's going to happen. If need be, you will literally pass out, meaning become unconscious, and then start breathing again. We have systems built in to make sure there's not too much and not too little. They're not 100% accurate, but they work really well.
Why do you say it like that?
What?
Like that we have these things.
Because people don't trust that things happen for reasons.
Yeah.
This is the thing about the thirst quenching stuff. We'll do that right now. Is what everyone is focused on is the conscious experience of thirst, the conscious experience of hunger. Like, what do I consciously perceive? What do I notice myself feeling or sensing that I call thirst or hunger or whatever? But there are activities that you engage in theoretically that, like, given the right context, you could continue to do that activity for 8 hours straight, more or less, right? During that period of time, your thoughts are entirely about whatever you're doing, right? You're not thinking about drinking, you're not thinking about eating, you're not thinking about using the bathroom. Does that mean that during that period of time you don't eat or drink or use the bathroom? No. You still do those things. Right. I mean, we could shorten windows, or, some people might say I myself have often gone 8 hours without eating food, whatever. But the point is, extended out if need to. The point is that even if you don't consciously perceive some thirst or whatever, some impulse, and even if you don't consciously decide to act upon it, it will still happen. It can still happen, at least. So
whatever those thirst quenching, one of two things. Either somebody has identified part of the system that results in like, our body monitoring for do we need thirst? And then the gum provides something to your body that impacts that.
I love it. Have you ever had?
So like, obviously this isn't the case, but theoretically that it would be like, okay, if you eat this gum or if you chew this gum and it just releases a bunch of water into your body, then yes, you'll be less thirsty.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of what it feels like. It's almost like a gusher, but you're chewing on it forever.
Or, for example, and I think this is true, but I can't say this for sure, that if part of what you're monitoring as like thirst is how dry the inside of your mouth or the roof of your mouth is, and we're not actually monitoring dry, because that requires different metrics than we're monitoring a sensation that we associate with the mouth being dry. If that gum then somehow counteracts that sensation and makes your mouth feel like it's like it feels differently, now it feels the way that we associate with not dry, then that would change your conscious experience of thirst. But either way, unless the gum is literally putting water into your body,
right,
it's not actually changing the levels of water in your body.
I want to know. I would love that if it was, but you're probably more on.
I mean, I guess I'll never say never, but I can't imagine what process
I don't know.
gum could do that would like provide water to your body.
Yeah.
I heard that you only really need to drink water when you're thirsty, but I always figured you needed to consider issues of ADHD and low interoception. Like it helps to develop a habit of water if you habitually ignore your body signals. Okay. Practical terms, absolutely, 100%. Technically speaking, no. Because yes, what I call like interoceptive hyposensitivity, meaning that you notice your internal interoceptive signals related to like the internal physical state of the body at some diminished rate, less than seems to be useful, less than average, whatever. Then it would logically stand that drinking water without noticing that signal would be better than waiting for the signal. Okay. And again, in practical terms, yeah, drink more water, everybody. Always drink more water. Just you're drinking more water. It is true that too much water in the body is bad and too little water in the body is bad, but we have very effective systems of eliminating excess water. So you're not really, absent any like specific medical concerns, you're not really in danger of being harmed by drinking too much water. The worst thing that's going to happen to you is you'll just need to pee a lot more frequently. You can get past that, but
Past that?
No, I mean, you can go so far that even your ability to eliminate excess water can't keep up with it, and you can die from that, like eventually. But I believe the body on average can eliminate like 1 liter of water per hour, something like that. So when I'm saying technically, I'm talking about things like need to drink. What do we mean by need to drink? If we're talking about what would be optimal, then we can have discussions about whether it would be optimal for you to drink more than you're prompted to. But again, we're also talking about the conscious experience of thirst.
Yeah.
Meaning ADHD or not, and I very much follow the stereotypical pattern of ADHD when it comes to eating and drinking. But like if I have a glass of water in front of me at my desk, even if I'm focused on work, I will drink that water while I'm working without paying attention to it at all. It does seem to be true, though, that if there isn't a drink around me, I will sometimes like notice how parched I am and think like, oh, I need to get a drink or whatever, and then just not do anything about it because I'm focused on this for a long period of time. So you only really need to drink water when you're thirsty. That's definitely true, meaning ADHD or not, you will not die from lack of water if you drink when you are thirsty. You will feel thirsty long before you would die, like long before you die. It might be you might feel thirsty later than would be optimal, but only by in the window of possibilities here. We're talking about a very small margin. If it was bigger than that, you would know. In other words, interoceptive hyposensitivity, like all hyper and hyposensitivities, I believe, they're not biological, like they're not genetic in origin. They're not deficiencies. You learn over time. Your processes adapt and change over time to like how much is it worth paying attention to this type of data versus this type of data, whatever. Meaning nobody's thirst sensitivity is low enough that it is causing like significant issues for them unless they have identified those issues as being about something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that like you're having big problems with something, and if you drink more water, that would help a lot. But you have to have an explanation for that isn't about water. Oh, that's happening because of this other thing. So that happens, and that's kind of the frequent thing that happens, especially when people with ADHD or whatever discover this stuff, is like, wait a second, this thing that I've been struggling with can be related to how much water you've drank. Like, I don't think I've been drinking enough water. That happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you won't die. Like, it takes days to die of lack of water, and people with ADHD don't actually have an attention deficit.
I don't know, Brandon, you haven't seen what I'm like when I'm playing Hades. Pretty sure I would crumble to dust before getting up to get water.
Crumble to dust.
That is funny. And I know it's a joke. And it is funny, and I like it. And Hades is cool.
I don't know what Hades is.
It's a video game. It's a roguelike video game. It's very cool. But I know that that's not a true statement, because you're not still playing Hades. Right? Like, you stopped at some point. You didn't sit in your own feces and urine. You didn't starve to death. You didn't like stay awake until you died. You didn't even probably miss work and whatever.
How do you know?
I don't know. Some of these things I'm assuming. That's fair. Some of them I know because you're alive. So, it is, no matter how much you enjoy something, hell, like, take what's just off the top of your head. Don't worry about being super accurate about this.
Oh,
just
no.
like, what activity do you most enjoy?
I like decorating my apartment.
Okay. If you are sick with the flu, do you get up and decorate your apartment?
Absolutely not.
Like, no matter what your favorite activity is, if you are like feverish and vomiting, you're probably not doing that activity. So you don't know that. I don't know which one that's a response to, but whatever it is true. I don't know. You could be a ghost in the machine for all I know. All I'm seeing is some words on my screen.
Given how much time I spend on this stream,
God.
I'm almost certainly a stream ghost.
Fair enough.
Is that a phrase? A stream ghost?
No. Well, not one that I know of. Ghost in the Machine is.
Okay,
but that's a different thing. That's not about actual ghosts.
I got that. I think.
Although there's like been like an anime that got turned into a movie called Ghost in the Machine. Whatever. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, when I'm sick, I'm not going to do the things that I like to do.
Yeah, we actually, like, this is the part when you asked before, like, why do you say it like that? Like, we have processes in place. Is because we're all walking around here like, if I wasn't carefully, consciously monitoring everything, I'm pretty sure I would die. And like, nope, that's not how it works.
Mm-hmm.
Cognition is optional. There's all kinds of things that are alive that don't think at all. Not to say that a human is or would be like that, but just to share another thought experiment called the philosophical zombie, or the P zombie, is imagine that there's a person who, to all observances,
Mm-hmm.
every way of measuring, like empirically, behaves within the parameters, like is just like every other human.
Okay.
But they have no subjective internal experience. There is no cognition.
Mm-hmm.
You can't tell that because they say and do and feel and live and breathe and they do all the things just like other people do. So you have no way of knowing that they don't have any cognition, but they don't. And the point of that thought experiment is you can imagine that, right? Which means it is theoretically possible that there are people walking around with no thoughts and no internal subjective experience. This is what everyone's talking about with AI and robots and like this stuff we are worried about is like they seem just like a human you would have no way of knowing, but they're not. It's like
Most recent episodes of Black Mirror, if you haven't gotten into
Sure.
them.
there are reasons that that is scary to us, and I don't believe that that is actually true. I believe that all people are like have a subjective internal experience, but it isn't theoretically required that a person have that in order to be able to live and breathe and even talk.
We can't stop ourselves from thinking, can we? Unless we're asleep.
Depends on what you mean by thinking.
Mm,
We can, so mostly, oh boy. A lot of the time when we're talking about thinking in this context, what we're talking about is metacognition, which is an awareness of one's own thinking.
Sure.
So sometimes when people say thinking, like I am thinking or I'm not thinking, they just are referring to meta. If ever a person's like, I just started doing this game and I wasn't thinking at all, they're talking about metacognition, not cognition. They just mean I was not aware of my own thoughts. During those times, there is still, theoretically, there are thoughts happening in a different way of meaning thought, like not being aware of that thought, but in the sense of like taking in information, running it through some stuff, and then utilizing that information. So a very common classic example of this is when you're driving a route that you've driven a million times before, and you just kind of zone out, and then you've arrived 20 minutes later.
Mm-hmm.
You might say like, I wasn't thinking at all during that time, but obviously information was being brought in that was being utilized in some way. Otherwise you would have gotten into a million car accidents, or you wouldn't at the very least have ended up where you are. You took in information, made decisions, and did things, behaved in certain ways in response to that information. So there's that level of thinking. We could also likely say that like, no, during that 20-minute drive, you were like thinking. You were even aware of, you were daydreaming or just wondering about stuff or whatever. And sometimes we know that. Sometimes at the end of the drive, it's like, oh, I wasn't paying attention. I was thinking about this upcoming whatever. But there are times where it's like, no, I wasn't thinking at all. But what we're talking about there is, do you remember anything that you were thinking about during that time? Which is a different thing than, like another way to say it is, well, this is tricky if we want to be real precise, but forget precision. Dreaming. We could theoretically say, like, even if you don't remember having a dream, that doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't dream, just that you don't remember it. That's tricky, though. It's a different kind of thing, because we don't actually know if you dream. We just know that you remember dreaming.
I do have a cave.
Ghost in the Machine is definitely cooler. That's what I am. I do have to cave eventually and admit that I am being cheeky, but maybe not today. That requires a level 18 monk. When you're a level 18 monk, you can astral project. And I'm pretty sure if you can do that, you can manage your thoughts. That's funny because I see that connection, that correlation, but actually theoretically astral projection is the opposite of that. The astral projection theoretically is an awareness only of your own thoughts and not at all of your body or like the physical environment to which your body is connected.
Just an awareness of your thoughts?
Well, so astral projection is, I mean, in the specific D&D sense, it's like a literal, your soul leaves your body and you can travel to other planes and other places without your body while it hangs out behind. But it's a thing, not just from D&D. They got that idea from like real world ideas. But same basic idea, to be able to like project your consciousness outside of your body.
Great. New Black Mirror episode about this, Brandon. I'm telling you.
And I think certainly, you can package your thoughts and send them elsewhere at least. Right. So a lot of what people think about astral projection, in fact, most of what I am aware of people in this culture thinking of astral projection is like, you are physically in a different location, but just your consciousness. You know, like if you were to astrally project, you can see what's happening in that building over there. So you're actually picking up real visual data that actually exists and whatever. I don't think that's really where it generally, what the idea originally was, or we wouldn't really call it astral projection. You know, that would be called like telepathy, or what's the word I'm looking, clairvoyance, or whatever. You know, that's still not the right word. There's a term for that. Anyway, if a person were to like get to a point where they have zero awareness of their own physical body, which includes meaning zero awareness of the physical environment, because you are only aware of the physical environment via your body. So you're just your thoughts, nothing else, which is a thing that everyone, well, I shouldn't say that, which is theoretically a thing that people experience when you're dreaming, that to some extent you are unaware of your body, right? It's just thoughts, just cognition, potentially. The idea that that would somehow result in you being able to observe the real, like, physical environment just in a different place than when where your body is, I don't know why anyone would ever come to the conclusion that that was. I mean, I can see once you are given that idea that it's something you could do, that you could then come, like, think of it as that's something that I do. But who was the first person that was like, oh, I was just thinking about stuff, but you know what? That was real stuff that I actually observed from 2 towns over. And how would we have tested to know that? You know, like,
I don't like that.
I think what it's generally is like, it's like an awareness of a different experience, like like an out of body experience, not like I'm traveling to a different location in my spirit.
Sure.
To a Greyhound station, preferably to far off destinations where they're far more suited than here. So to answer your question, we absolutely can get ourselves out of our head, that version of stopping thinking.
Okay, and how does that happen?
So this is where you can't do it by thinking about it.
Uh-oh.
And that's where all this stuff is coming from, right? Is everyone's like, okay, but the way to get ourselves to do anything is by thinking about it, right?
Uh-oh.
So any question that's like, how do I think less, when the premise is by thinking about it, like, that's not really possible, is it? Of course it's possible. You think less all the time.
Yeah.
What tends to be happening when you are thinking less or not thinking at all? You don't have to say that out loud, but like, monitor for that stuff, and then start theorizing about, like, seems like when X or Y or Z is the case, I don't really think.
Yeah.
So the next time you're thinking and you want to not be thinking, try X, Y, and Z, see if that works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, everybody goes to sleep. So we literally can make ourselves stop thinking. But if you try to get yourself to fall asleep by thinking about falling asleep, then you don't fall asleep.
You have to
touch some grass. Grass has special metaphysical thought abstracting properties. Disperses your thoughts throughout all the other grass in the world.
Now I'm thinking about what's the word with the plants communicating to each other? Or like the roots.
I don't know. Plants do communicate with one another, depending on how you use that word. There was a book that came out not too long ago that was fairly well known there. I mean, this was like probably within the last 5 or 10 years, talking about how plants communicate with one another.
Would you define it a different way than communicate?
Probably. I guess I wouldn't say that they're. Yes, I would define it differently. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm being cheeky today. You don't need to apologize for being cheeky. It's fun.
Yeah. We're feeding right into it.
And, you know, like, even the jokes and stuff still just prompt us to talk about other stuff that I think is also interesting and worth discussing. Okay. And I didn't read the book, so let me be clear there. I know some of the examples people are referring to that are in the book, but not all of them, so it's possible there's something going on that I'm not aware of. But to me, what this is not like the technical definition of what communication means. Maybe it is. I don't know. That's not my point.
So maybe they do. But to me, when we're talking about communication, we're talking about abstract information.
Okay.
That like what I'm doing is making sound waves in the air by
Mhm.
vibrating parts of my body and bouncing those sound waves off of different parts of my body in certain ways, right? Then those sound waves hit your eardrums and get perceived by you. But with communicative sound, like with language, you're either not aware at all of the sound, or even if you are aware of the sound, you're not just aware of the sound. Instead, you're aware of some meaning which has been connected to that sound that's pulled up for you. If I say, close your eyes and picture a cow, you're not just hearing the sounds of me saying that. You are now like in your subjective internal experience doing something that matches to picturing a cow.
Mhm.
And no, plants don't do that.
Yeah.
What they were talking about is things like, one of the examples was if there's a forest fire, a certain kind of tree will release a particular chemical or spore or some kind that other trees further away, when they detect those, will change what they're doing to like soak up more water.
Or when
and
grass
stuff.
gets cut, the smell says
the
like,
death
watch
cry.
out, watch out. Yeah.
But that's kind of like saying that like if I stabbed a human and then their blood falls on the ground, other humans that see that will run away, and saying that means that human communicated to those other humans, instead of like those other humans saw and then responded to signs that a bad, like a hurtful thing might happen.
But it is communicating.
Yeah, depending on how you want that word to be used, you could say communicate.
I don't know how I want it to be used.
I think what the point of that was, impact each other without physically touching each other, is all that really means.
If
like,
chemical signals through my, what is that word?
I don't know. Through a mycorrhizal network counts as communications. I don't know the word mycorrhizal. I'm guessing that maybe Bast Insider read the book and is referencing something from the book. But yeah, my mycorrhizal, fungi. Yeah, I mean, it's also kind of like saying that like my eyes communicate with my stomach, right? Like,
okay,
it's not untrue that if you see something, then your stomach can be impacted.
Yeah.
But like, are we going to call that communication? It's really just up to.
I kind of love it.
Yeah.
I do.
I don't remember who did it, but I do vaguely remember a bit from when I was like preteen. I saw some stand-up comedian, or maybe like a teenager or whatever, who was doing a bit where they were like voicing all the different body parts of like the eyes. You know, this is the eyes we see, blah blah blah, and this is the stomach and whatever, and it was hilarious. But I don't really.
I like that you said some stand-up comedian, or maybe it was some kid, as if a stand-up comedian could not be a kid.
I didn't say that. I wonder what I said. I said like, or some bit.
Oh, I thought you said like a kid.
I also said like when I was a preteen, or maybe I was a teen.
Maybe I crossed them a little bit.
I don't know. I didn't read the book. I've heard it discussed a number of times. Yeah, that book, again, it's one of those things where it's like, if done in a certain way, people love finding out that they're wrong. Like, in this case, people love finding out, like, wait, I thought plants didn't communicate with one another, but they do?
I'm just thinking of oh my gosh, Magic School Bus episode where they teach you about this. The newest one, where Lin-Manuel Miranda sings the theme song.
I would guess that episode was informed by this book.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, and some of that way of like presenting things to people in a way that they love finding out they've been wrong. My dad studied plant pathology, though. Interesting. Is kind of like using language in a way that like, same with humor, using language in a way almost that makes it seem like, my lack of understanding something might be a problem. Oh no, this isn't relevant, so it's just fun. Like, I was wrong about plants, better look into this. Oh, not in any way that like impacts me or anything. Fine, that's just fun.
picked up a few things.
I love that phrase.
Yeah, generally relief. Humans love relief. So like this is like cathartic experiences or
So learning that plants communicate with each other causes relief,
in a
in a
sense.
sense.
Like if I was like, did you know plants communicate with each other? And you're like, oh no. Does that mean they like have feelings and they're afraid of me? And when I cut the grass, I'm doing a bad thing? And like, no, it's not that. It's like, oh, okay, fine. Or like, oh no, does this mean that like the grass is telling the trees that I'm a
But
villain
what-
and they should hate me?
What about those experiments where people talk nicely or poorly to their plants? What's going on there, Brennan?
Okay.
I got 3 minutes for you to explain.
Some of the explanation is easy because some of the explanation is a lot of that stuff is just fraudulent research.
Okay.
Some of it has like been admitted as being fraudulent research.
Our quote is back. People like to be surprised, not tricked.
Oh yeah, people like to be surprised. They don't like to be tricked. I was thinking about that the other day after that one, and I had some thought, but I don't have time to figure it out right now because you gotta go soon. So, maybe I'll try to remember what it was. Anyway, some of that is just made up research, and made up research is much more likely to become popularly known. Like vaccines cause autism, completely fabricated research, but the tail wags the dog, or a lie can travel the world before the truth gets its pants on, stuff like that, right?
Haven't heard that one, but I'm assuming it's one that's been said.
I'm not sure. It might be a lie can travel the world twice while the truth is still getting its pants on, or something like that. But part of the reason that those things become so popularly known is because it's like, that doesn't seem at all like what it was. And one of the ways it's really easy to do that is to just say that something is different than it actually is, and then everyone's going to be like, that's not what I thought, because that's not what it is. So some of that's just made up.
Okay.
Now, I don't know all the research on all the various different things, and I'm not going to say it's all made up. I certainly believe that there are things that people don't, that none of us monitor. Like a big part of the point of what I'm trying to talk about with all this is like, if you make the mistake of thinking that you can consciously identify all important information and understand everything, like, no, stuff is happening that you can't monitor, that you can't. If you had taken a human from 200 years ago that knew literally everything that every human had ever known up to that point, and been like, there's ultraviolet light coming from the sun that can give you skin cancer, they'd be like, no, right? Like, I am very certain that there is stuff happening that we are not able to observe or monitor.
Sure.
And that's part of why I'm so focused on like just doing what you can to lean into impulses and whatever, and only overriding them for reasons, rather than feeling like thinking you need a reason to do anything. You need reason to override impulse. So there's that. I'll also say, without knowing the research and whatever, that I'm sure they did good research. I don't know who did this, but I am willing to believe that they did good in like trying to eliminate variables and constants and blah, blah, blah. But I can imagine all other kinds of things that might correlate to whether somebody's talking nicely to their plants or
That's so true.
not talking nicely to their plants that might impact how those plants then are doing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
I don't think it's just the words, but if it is just the words, either it's something we have no ability to identify or monitor, or it's just the sound vibrations, because the plants definitely don't have meaning connected to those words.
Right.
All right.
Fascinating. All right.
Good to be with you all.
Bye.
We gotta
Thanks.
wrap up. See you later. Good to be with you all. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. Okay, good to know. Or another version, falsehood flies and the truth comes limping after it. Yeah. Direwolves come back from extinction. That's an interesting one. Well, according to our favorite website, I'm designating quote investigator on the stream as the stream's favorite website now. That's a good one. Yeah. Thanks for the stream. The direwolf thing is interesting to me because, as I understand it, again, I'm not an expert, but it looks like they made genetic edits to, obviously they made genetic edits to modern wolves in order to make their DNA similar to direwolf DNA. I don't know that that means that it's exactly the same as the direwolf DNA, But even if it is, there are environmental factors that make something what it is beyond just the DNA. I don't understand scientifically, classification-wise. Anyway, whatever, doesn't matter. Again, interesting though that becomes so popular, right? And it became popular this last week when it was on the cover of Time, even though the actual thing that happened 1-2 years ago. Like, anyway, yeah, everyone I've heard talk about it is saying these are GMO gray wolves, not dire wolves. Yeah, I don't know actually the distinction, but whatever. I'm more interested, as always, like I was just saying, I'm more interested in how it's all communicated and how the information spreads. Like whether they're dire wolves or not, I mean, that would depend on the criteria you're using, whatever. I don't care. I'm more interested in like, everybody's talking about this all of a sudden without like, why? Not just that it's on the cover of Time, but also like, what is it about this and the way that it's, like, for example, the fact that it's dire wolves, 100%. A big part of the reason that everybody's talking about it. If you had picked a different extinct species and the name of that extinct species was like the European ground slug or whatever, and the same thing had happened scientifically, and people were like, they brought back the European ground slug, people would not be talking about it at all the way that they are, because the species they brought back is called a dire wolf. And I don't know this, I haven't personally seen this, but I'm willing to bet a good sum of money that if you collected up like every social media post referencing this story, that 40% of those posts make a Game of Thrones joke or reference as well. So like, the species is inherently more interesting. The name dire wolf, even if it wasn't connected to a popular fantasy series recently, is also inherently interesting. Dire and wolf are both like commonly known words, and put together really creates an image. But then add on the fact that this is something that was in a very popular fantasy series just a few years ago. Like, anyway. Yeah, it feels engineered to get attention. Oh, 100%. And that doesn't mean that I don't know who these people are that did it or what they were doing or any of that. It absolutely you could not argue that it was not engineered to get attention. They picked dire wolves for a reason. They could have picked all kinds of things. Hell, like you could have just said the actual binomial nomenclature of the dire wolf, whatever, lupus, whatever, instead of dire wolf. I mean, obviously, whoever did this, they have people whose entire job is to be like, how can we get as much attention on this as possible? So I'm not saying that's bad or takes away from what happened. But that's the part that's interesting to me, is how were they effective in getting everybody's attention and so on. Anyway, good to be with you. I got to go. See you next week. Be well.